What's up, y'all? Football is back. J Mike is back. We are back with another edition of the DNVR Rams podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Justin Michael. We have got a ton to dive into. I appreciate everybody being a little bit patient with me while I was out on vacation last week. Admittedly, did not think I would miss as much as I did. That is kind of always how it goes, right? You know, whenever you try and get a moment of peace, that's when life tends to get chaotic. That's what happened with the Adidas confirmation. We got a resolution on the Mountain West Pac-12 lawsuit. We'll talk about both of those things today. We will talk about some observations from football camp, which is great to be back. It's great to have some tangible stuff to get into and not have everything be hypotheticals, although there's still, plenty of that until we actually get into the games here. But I'm just really appreciative of you guys for being a little bit patient. I'll have a ton of content coming out for you guys on social, on the website. It's a great time to become a diehard. You'll get access to all of my written content throughout the season. Been back for less than 48 hours. I already have 2 pieces up on there. We're going live today and Thursday. So, we're in the thick of it. And I, for one, am stoked. It was great to have a moment of peace. Got to spend some time with my family. My grandfather, one of my biggest influences in my life, he's in his upper 80s at this point. So anytime that I have to, be with him a little bit is something I'm always just really grateful for. But yeah, it's been a little bit chaotic. Jumping right back into the thick of it here. I was at practice yesterday. We'll be back tomorrow as well as Saturday. I think Saturday might be a scrimmage setting, which I am hopeful we'll be able to, get some good stuff out of it. I'm going to kind of talk about my mindset going into camp and, how I intend to cover the team, give you guys what I feel is important context in regards to what we are and are not allowed to talk about. Won't be holding anything back from you guys intentionally, but there are certain policies that we have to respect and abide the rules a little bit, because not only could I cost myself access, but I could really lose the entire, local media the ability to, take part and watch practice, which would be a big bummer for everyone. So I definitely am going to be respectful of all that. I will get into all that. It's great to have Christian back, our awesome producer. He had been gone on maternity leave for a while. They had their first child, which is really exciting, but it's great to have him back. He killed it with the thumbnail image on YouTube. If you are watching live on YouTube and you wouldn't mind hitting a thumbs up, I certainly would appreciate it. Say what's up in the Toyota chat. We've got my guy Kyle out there. We got our guy Lamar back. It's good. It's good to have plenty to talk about. So I guess instead of, me continuing to ramble on, let's just jump right into it and start with some of the stuff that we missed while I was out. The biggest piece of which was CSU's officially an Adidas school. We had kind of wondered what that timeline might look like. If you listen to the show, I told you in late May that they were moving on from Under Armour, that I anticipated it would be Adidas. As the summer went on, we only continued to affirm that. It did sound like it was a little bit weird and chaotic behind the scenes in terms of the timeline of this all becoming finalized. And I think there are going to be some logistical things CSU is going to have to work with over this first year. John Weber did an interview with Kevin Lytle while I was out of town that kind of dives into some of this stuff. It doesn't sound like there's going to be, at least out of the gate, a ton of apparel available for fans. It doesn't sound like the variety is going to be, there at the beginning, but I want to remind everybody it's a multi-year deal. It's going to get better as it goes on. Adidas has better resources than Under Armour does. This was kind of an issue when CSU switched from Russell to Under Armour back in the day, just getting, the correct branding, and sometimes the coloring can be a little bit off. It seems like some of the initial gear looked closer to Michigan State green than, say, CSU green. I think all of that will get worked out as time goes on. But as I have said from the beginning, I think this is a good move for CSU. I think Adidas is a bigger brand with more significant global sports partnerships. It's one of the biggest brands in soccer, especially, but a deep basketball history as well. It's a brand that carries more weight culturally. That's a bit of a mouthful. It's a better shoe brand, certainly, which is a factor with recruiting. I have heard from so many different basketball players, especially, but football guys as well, how much they could not stand the Under Armour sneakers and cleats. I do think it was improved compared to what our Under Armour was rolling out, a decade plus ago. But certainly Adidas is going to be an upgrade there. And I just think it's another step in the right direction, right? I know a lot of people prefer Nike. It would be cool to be a Nike school. Everything I've heard behind the scenes since I've been on media and even going back to when I worked for CSU Football was that there's not an interest on Nike's part. They already have this market with CU and Air Force. They feel it would be redundant at that point, don't feel that the money would be worth it for them. And that's a big part of why CSU chose, Under Armour back in the day in the first place, is you want to work with an apparel provider who is going to prioritize your institution a little bit. And Under Armour was great about that. We got some cool, alternate uniforms, State Pride and Ag Day, and they've introduced some other stuff over the years. They were a solid partner, and you hope that, Adidas will continue to be a brand that, values CSU and, eventually gives, the fans great gear, which is, I think, a point of contention from a lot of the fan base. At least the feedback I've heard over the last couple of years is that they felt pretty underwhelmed with what Under Armour was throwing out there. I'm telling you to be patient out of the gate. It might feel a little underwhelming initially, but I do think in the long run, this is going to be a move that is good for CSU, and you just want to keep climbing the ladder, keep growing your brand. A lot like what you would say about, moving from the Mountain West to the Pac-12. It's an opportunity to grow your brand that much further. And I do think, as CD Sticks is saying here in the Toyota chat, it does kind of look like Adidas just makes higher quality apparel, from the shorts that, you see the guys working out in out on the field to the sneakers and the gloves and just everything in between. So I'm really excited to see where it goes from here. I'm glad that we have some clarity on the timeline of that. It would have been weird, right, had we seen all of these teams continue to practice in Adidas and then for football to come out and play in Under Armour this fall. I didn't have anything definitive that said, when exactly Adidas was going to take over. So we had to wait it out and see, how the situation played out. Glad we have a resolution there. Excited to see what this Adidas partnership looks like with CSU moving forward. We also missed, as we said at the beginning, the resolution between the Pac-12 and the Mountain West. After close to 3 years, we can finally put some of this behind us. The narratives, the battle between the fans of the various schools, that will continue. There's always going to be a direct link between the two conferences just based on how all of this played out. We're going to get measured up against each other, both, subtly and unsubtly. There's going to be a desire for each of these leagues to try and outshine each other. But finally, we can put the lawsuit stuff behind us. We can all move on with our lives a little bit. According to Mark Ziegler of the San Diego Union Tribune, who was a big part of breaking a lot of the updates with this situation over the last couple of years. He's got really good sourcing at San Diego State. He reports that the 5 departing schools will pay the Mountain West around $70 million. If you remember back, the Mountain West was seeking close to $155 million between exit fees and the poaching penalties. Look, you're going to see hot takes on both sides. You're going to see both sides claim victory. You're going to see a lot of, the same running around in circles that we've seen for the last, 2.5 years. But the reality was that we were probably going to meet in the middle at some point, and more or less that's what happened. You knew the Pac-12 schools weren't just going to get away with paying nothing. You also knew that the Mountain West trying to seek $155 million was just insane, and that was not living in reality, which I think was a factor with the Mountain West and all of this. And I do think that Gloria Navarra as the Mountain West commissioner, although she has done as good of a job of stopping the bleeding and keeping the conference afloat, managing to stay alive as you could in a really difficult scenario, I think a lot of this, stems back to trying to charge Oregon State and Washington State just absurd, fees to continue the scheduling agreement. It created a lot of animosity. All of this got ugly. And in the end, it seems like we landed on a pretty reasonable place. I do think that, settling for less than $80 million with all these schools, basically the exit fees coming out to about $10 million per school rather than $20 million like the Mountain West was seeking, that feels like a win for the Pac-12. I feel like, just optically, had the Mountain West been able to, pull like north of 100 million or something, now you're really talking about this whole endeavor being worth it for them in the end. And I just feel like the Pac-12 had better leverage. I had talked about how having the added resources that you got from the Pac-12, with we kind of referred to it as a treasure chest these past couple of years, but it was basically the money that Oregon State and Washington State got from all those OG Pac-12 schools leaving. Well, that put them in a position of strength when it came to, being able to afford better attorneys, being able to draw this out in court. The longer this played out, the worse for the Mountain West. They owed all this money to UNLV and Air Force, which I think in part is why they went out and added North Dakota State, which is a fun move, but it's really about the influx of cash and being able to deliver, on the money you promised to Air Force and UNLV. Otherwise, that whole league and the grant of rights and them being kumbaya together kind of falls apart. In the end, if you are these Pac-12 schools and you're going to make an estimated, at least $4 million more per year than what they would have made in the old Mountain West, it's going to only take a couple of years to recoup that money that you made to, pay these exit fees and get out of the Mountain West and go into the new Pac-12. That all feels very reasonable and justifiable to me. Again, like had they had to pay 20 plus million per school and then, you're only increasing your revenue by a couple million per year, now you're really having to talk yourself into this being a worthy endeavor. But I think when you factor in just the boost in brand power of getting that Pac-12 IP and also, being able to be accessible throughout linear cable, and you don't need a crazy sports package, to watch the games, and it's not going to impact the kickoff times. I'm all over the place at this point, but I just think when you factor in all of this in totality, which is you're getting out for about 10 million per school, you're going to make more money on a better TV deal with great kickoff times for both, TV consumption as well as the fans in the stands, which was a big fear with this move to the Pac-12, right? Are we going to end up with some of those 8:30, 9 p.m. kickoffs that the Mountain West had plenty of over the years, but the Pac-12 kind of became infamous for over its last decade with the OG members, Pac-12 After Dark and all that. I think you have an opportunity to be in a league that has a higher competitive floor. Your accessibility is improved. You're on, more readily accessible channels without having to spend a bunch of money. When I had Comcast, you needed like an advanced sports package to be able to get CBS Sports Network. And that's what so many of the games were on, being on USA, being on the CW, being, easily watchable on just a basic cable package, as well as streamable through multiple platforms. That's a huge win for the Pac-12. And I do think they probably left a little money on the table with going with a traditional cable outlet versus, maybe one of the streamers. But at the same time, you're seeing USA really prioritize the Pac-12. And while people will, mock it, we saw the same thing when the CW started doing college football a year or two ago. The numbers, the viewership's been great, So I'm really excited about how all of this is panning out. I do think there have been some whiffs along the way. I don't think it was necessarily a perfect rollout by any means. I have my own thoughts about, losing New Mexico basketball for, Texas State. But when you see what they're investing, when you factor in what it would cost to add them versus someone else, I think it was another sensible and justifiable decision. And it allows you to get into Texas, which has a ton of benefits as well. We'll see what happens, moving forward. Obviously, you got to have success. You've got to make the CFP. You need the Gonzaga addition to work out in a major way. You need San Diego State and Utah State and CSU and some of these basketball schools to keep up what they've been able to accomplish in recent years. But I don't think that's like some crazy fantasy by any means. I think this is a league that is going to be really fun on multiple fronts and in multiple sports. And the way this is all panning out, it feels like it's been a really nice month, for these Pac-12 schools, when there's been a lot of outside criticism and what I feel is a lot of, unfair pot shots from people who don't necessarily factor in all the context, especially that, the game has kind of evolved in a way that's been really, really bad for a lot of these schools that have been left behind in the most recent realignment carousel. You're just doing what you can to stay afloat and to remain relevant, and you are trying to, kick, scratch, claw, do whatever you can to ensure that whenever college football in the next, 5 to 10 years, it seems like it's speeding up with some of the stuff that's happened in the ACC and the Protect College Sports Bill and all that. We'll talk about that over the next, 6 to 8 weeks. It seems like, we're headed for a new era of college football, one that's probably not going to include everyone that it has in the past. These Pac-12 schools, they unfortunately missed the boat when the Big 12, went out and added, Cincinnati and UCF and some of those other schools. They didn't get chosen around 2014 when they were, kind of sniff around CSU and San Diego State and Boise and some of these other programs. They don't want to get left behind. And so, like, whether you think that the Pac-12 is some major step up or not, at the end of the day, it is a step up, and it allows you to, be with a group of schools who are all on the same, line of thinking and all are investing in a way that, makes sense, when the truth is there were some schools at the bottom of the Mountain West who kind of hold you back a little bit. But that's my 2 cents. I've been pretty open about all of that since the beginning. We're going to get into some camp takes. We're going to play some clips of Mora. We've got a lot to dive into, so stick around. Let me shout out a couple of partners real quick, and then we'll keep the party rolling. All right, you guys remember our friends at Ent Credit Union from last season? Well, they are now Wings Credit Union, same crew, still the official banking partner of the Broncos, just a new name, a fresh look, and the perks are still great. Honestly, I'd open an account with Wings Credit Union just so I could get one of those really cool Bo Nix or PS2 cards that they have. Plus, though, I could win tickets. I could save 10% at the team store. Basically upgrade my entire game day experience, which is what I'm all about. I've never seen a debit card quite like this in terms of like how collectible they feel. I don't know. They're really cool. There's a couple of them in the office, and it allows you to get access to all kinds of great benefits. 10% off at Empower Field. You can win tickets to a home game, or you can score some exclusive Broncos merch. If you want to bank like a Bronco, visit wingsco.com/DNVR to open an account. It's insured by NCUA, membership required, account requires association with Wings Broncos debit card. Shout out to our friends at Wings Credit Union. I also want to shout out our friends over at Toyota. Trucks have always been a part of Toyota's DNA for generations. Toyota's built durable legends destined for greatness and perfect for Colorado. Whether you're conquering off-road trails, whether you're hauling the weight of the world, there's a Toyota truck that's just right for you. Check out the Tacoma. Check out the Land Cruiser. Toyota offers 17 models with available all-wheel drive or four-wheel drive like the Epic 4Runner. They also offer more low and zero-emission vehicles combined than any other automaker to give customers numerous choices to reduce their carbon footprint. 16 different hybrid vehicles to choose from, like the Tundra iForce Max hybrid truck. Not to be outdone, though, Toyota SUVs take command on the road and on the trail, so you can explore the road less traveled without sacrificing smooth city rides in SUVs like the RAV4 and Grand Highlander. Toyota is a proud partner of CSU Athletics. They are the official vehicle of DNVR. Toyota, let's go places. Looks like we have a super chat here from our guy, the Oso Blanco, $20. Thankful for Justin's continued deep coverage of CSU. I'm thankful for you, my man. I'm thankful for all of you that continue to support the show, that tune in, that make all this possible. Honestly, I just try and create something that didn't really exist when I was growing up. If you were fortunate to grow up in the Fort Collins area, you were really lucky to have the Coloradoan. You got consistent CSU coverage. But I grew up in Lakewood, in the metro area, and CSU coverage, I mean, it still is few and far between. And so I just thought, what if there was someone who provided coverage as dedicated and as passionate for CSU as we see, for the Broncos, any of the pro beats, or, even the attention that the Buffs get. I always just kind of wanted to create something like that. Before we get into some camp takes, we do have the CSU stat of the day, and we're shouting out a legendary Ram, a quarterback who really set the bar so high in terms of his passing precision that we haven't really been able to see anything close to it since. Nick Stevens had a great career, actually broke a couple of Garrett's records, so maybe I'm not being fair enough to him. And frankly, CSU, he was the last first-team all-conference quarterback the Rams had, so I think we would kill for Nick Stevens level quarterback play based on what we've seen over the last decade or so. But Garrett Grayson owns the single game, single season, and career records for pass attempts and pass completions. I'm going to say that again. He owns the single game and single season and career records for both pass attempts and pass completions for the Rams. His 2013 and 2014 seasons are two of the three best seasons in terms of passing production in school history. Just one of those dudes who lit it up and down the field. I still am a little surprised he didn't work out better in the NFL than he did. But he's one of those dudes who every time I go back and watch, I'm reminded really how dominant, those offenses were. I've watched the 2014 Showdown recently. I watched a random Nevada game from that year, and just seeing the way he and Richard would, connect up and down the field, the big explosive plays that they would create every single week. It really was eye-opening. You had some of that early on in the Bobo tenure, but really since 2018 or so, I guess, other than some garbage time production or like Preston Williams put out some big numbers in games they lost by 30, there just has not been enough explosiveness. The offense in general has just not been threatening. And that's where I'm cautiously optimistic going into this year, right? There are so many factors that you're going to have to look at for CSU to be an improved team. They basically have to be better across the board. Defensively, they stunk last year. So many injuries that went into that, no doubt, but they stunk. Offensively, they stunk even worse. It was as bad as I can recall. It made some of those Fairchild offenses feel potent. Special teams was bad last year. You hope to hit on another transfer kicker. It didn't work out. Another situation that needs to be better, although based on what we've seen from Cali Numa, I believe, to this point, I am encouraged there. But the offense especially has got to be so much improved. And then a lot of that comes down to quarterback play, and it just has not been good enough. You haven't had a first-team all-conference quarterback selection since 2017. You haven't even really scratched the surface of it other than 2023. And even then you had so many turnovers and you were such a mess defensively that it didn't really matter. But I'm really intrigued by what's going to happen with this quarterback situation. And we're going to play some clips here from Jim Mora kind of talking about it in just a sec. But before we get into all that, I want to be as transparent as possible when it comes to my coverage. Personally, I think the way that the NFL is covered and consumed has really warped the perceived value of day-to-day, training camp commentary. And the reality is that you kind of have to take a lot of information over a multi-week sample size and, look at averages. And instead, I feel like because there's such a demand for commentary and takes, we really jump to conclusions. We really put too much stock into, oh, this guy won one rep, he must be dominating, or he's guaranteed to start. And the truth is, if you watch enough practice and, you're out there for multiple hours, you're going to see the offense win some, you're going to see the defense win some, you're going to see mistakes made. And that's actually a good thing. If you're not making mistakes, then you're not trying enough, or you're incompetent on one side of the football. Like offensively is a great example of this. I was talking about this with Kevin Lytle. We were laughing so much at how the Cleveland media are covering their quarterback situation with Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders and Dylan Gabriel, where they have a running tally of pass completions. And like, to me, that lacks so much context. And obviously I'm a CSU guy, so like, if it, they put up a graphic that says Shedeur's 0 for 7, I might crack a joke or two. But if I'm being completely honest about, how I feel about football coverage, like, what was the setting, right? Like, is this a situational drill? What if it's fourth down and you can't just throw the football away, so you turned it over there because you were trying to make a play because you were getting in some situational work and it was fourth down, but the media couldn't see that from where they were positioned, or they didn't hear a coach say that, or whatever. And I'm using a very specific example to kind of, relate to, but I just want everybody to know that, like, I just don't want to over exaggerate. We need more time with this team. So many of the guys that are out there were not in the spring. They were kind of dinged up in the spring. I'm not going to be able to talk about injuries in detail moving forward. I'm not going to be able to talk about, this is what the starting ones looked like this week, or this is what the twos are. I'll talk about who I feel like is standing out, and I can give opinions, but I can't give you a, one for one breakdown of like, here is the ones, here are the twos. We're going to lose our access if that's the case. And again, yesterday was the first day with full pads. Like, they'd been in shells for a couple days. They're just now getting into full pads. Let's not overreact to every little clip that gets posted on Twitter, or if I bring up a guy because he made a play, that doesn't mean he's going to be the Heisman or something this year. It just means the guy made a good play. And I always struggle with that, because I want to give you guys as much info as I possibly can, but I also want to be fair to the players. I want to be accurate with my commentary, and I don't want to create expectations that, can't be lived up to, all the things that we've talked about over the years. So I'm just trying to be as transparent as possible off of the top. This is my mindset going back into training camp and really throughout the season. Like, I'll give opinions. I'm not going to hold back how I feel, but there are certain things, especially in camp, that we're not going to be able to talk about in the same type of detail. Otherwise, they're just not going to let us watch practice anymore, which, hey, I'm grateful for access in the first place, because there are a lot of football coaches across the country who feel like they are solving cancer or doing rocket science behind the scenes. And by God, if one of their plays were to get out there, the deadly consequences, the world might just end as we know it. I appreciate that Mora has been willing to, let us be out there. We can talk about the team. I think I can give like my own projected depth chart. I just can't tell you like, this is what they did today, this is what they're doing tomorrow, or we are going to get in trouble. But I can comment on what we see. I can comment on, what is said to us. So let's get into it, starting with the biggest, obviously, storyline of this entire training camp, which is going to be who is the starting quarterback. I wrote about this. Kevin wrote about this. We posted the clip, but don't anticipate Jim Mora tipping his hand any sooner than he has to. I've said since the spring that I feel like CSU can win with either Kason Farrar or Haas Haney. Certainly, if I had to bet on one of them, I still would lean Haas, just because of his all-world athleticism. He's one of the fastest football players I've seen at CSU in the decade I've covered the team. That includes like speedy receivers, corners, you name it. He is insanely fast. And I just think with so many moving parts, we'll see how the O-line's able to hold up. Injuries tend to factor a lot into all of that. I think having that ability to extend the play or just take off and make any carry a 70-yard touchdown run, because he's just so dang fast, I think there's a real advantage to that. That said, Farrar throws a really nice looking ball, and I posted a clip that Ruby from CSU Rams Live posted, and we'll play it when we play some B-roll here in a couple minutes. I think it's in there as well. He had about a 55-yard touchdown pass that was effortless. There was some pressure, slid up in the pocket, dropped a dime in a bucket. Haas had a really nice play as well where he hit Levon Brown, I believe, over a couple of DBs. Both these guys can make any throw on the field. Neither of them are statues. Well, I feel like Haas is a true dual threat, like you would scheme him the way you would have schemed Mike Vick back in the day. I'm not saying he's going to be Mike Vick, one of the freakiest football players we've ever seen, but just in terms of how you would try and use him and take advantage of that all-world speed. But I mean, Farrar can move a little bit too. He's agile in the pocket. We've seen him take off and run and leave guys in the dust. I truly think you can win with either of these quarterbacks, and at least to this point, it seems like it really is a true competition. Mora's not going to, and I wouldn't be surprised if they just don't announce one, period, right? He said he's going to make his decision about 4:02 on September 5th, right before kickoff against Wyoming. And honestly, what do you gain from announcing it publicly? Like it might become clear if the reps all of a sudden start leaning one way or another that this guy is probably going to be it. I have not seen anything like that would indicate us to believe it at this point that it's firmly one guy over the other. But I really feel like with what's at stake, the border war already matters more than any other game on the schedule. And that's before you even factor in all of the drama that comes with, the conference realignment storylines this year and Wyoming wanting to show up CSU for leaving them in the Mountain West and all that. Just strategically, like, what do you benefit from giving, the defense an idea of what that offense might look like? Neither quarterback has a ton of film out there. They have one career start apiece, not even a full start for Haas because he got hurt and broke his ankle. But the competition is very much on. The both guys, I really feel like are going to be in it. And I think there's a good chance we see them both in September, which to me is not necessarily indicative of one guy not being good enough or anything like that. I really feel like it's a situation where you have two guys who are good enough to win with. And I don't think that's been the case since Colin Hill and Nick Stevens in like 2016-17. It's legitimately been a decade since you had more than one guy who I think you could win at a high level with. There have been guys, if you put them in the right situation, like Patrick O'Brien, even Brousseau last year, like he's not super mobile, not even remotely as athletic as the guys they have in the building now. But I think if you put him behind let's say the 2013, 2014 offensive line, you give him a good run game, you give him, a deeper receiving core than he had to work with last year. He's a guy who I think you could get to a bowl with, maybe even win 7-8 games with under the right circumstances. This is the first time I feel like, regardless of who they start, since, Stevens and Hill, that like I could talk myself into them being a championship caliber quarterback. Maybe not this year, maybe it's more like next year. But when it comes to the arm talent, the raw athleticism, they both have been comfortable when we've seen them in situational work, going back to the spring, 2-minute drill, red zone, that type of stuff. I've been impressed. So here is Jim Mora, being a little bit cheeky when it comes to, not announcing a starting quarterback.
They're both highly competitive. So even if we were to name a starter today, they both continue to compete. Well, I mean, I'm putting DC in there because I think he's competing his tail off too. I have a lot of respect for that young man. We're going to name a starter probably about 4:02 p.m. on September 5th and not before that. So you can keep asking me, but I'm going to keep giving that answer.
I like it. He was fun to talk to yesterday. I'm going to play another clip here in a couple of moments where I felt like I asked a good question. He didn't really vibe with it, asked for some clarification, ended up asking a slightly altered follow-up, and we got a really good response about, him talking about the importance of the team being connected and, maybe that not being valued as much as it should when it comes to team building. But in terms of Farrar or Haney or, maybe Darius Curry wows the staff enough to truly, make this a 3-man race, feels like a two-man race to this point. Despite, Curry consistently receiving praise from every coach I've talked to going back to the spring. And I think that's admirable that he's stuck it out and that he's, continuing to fight. He's not pouting about a tough situation. He was supposed to be the next guy at CSU under Norvell. Circumstances change. He obviously made a mistake in the Boise State game, but I do credit him for continuing to battle, and he's made a good impression. It's just going to be a matter of consistency, who can execute at a higher rate And that's what kind of Mora alluded to here. He's looking for consistency out of his QBs.
They're making progress. It's like kind of the intensity and the physicality. The level of consistency has to improve every single day. They're not going to be perfect, but they have to aim to be the best they can be. And I just see a little bit too, and it's not drastic, but just a little bit too much inconsistency right now for our liking. I expect those guys to continue to improve that because they're both really conscientious young men. It's important to them. They're competing well against each other, with each other, but we need more consistency.
Some people are going to hear that and they're going to freak out and feel like that's a negative. Again, I think Mora is very pragmatic. I think he's not much of a cliche guy, especially with the, every day is great and everything's so perfect and we loved everything we're doing. And it's been very, from the hip. He is a straight shooter. He has incredibly high standards. He's a very demanding coach. He's very old school. I've talked about it going back to the spring. His vibes remind me a lot of Jim McElwain, who was also an intense guy, and he was a perfectionist, and it was his way or the highway. But the dude was a winner, and based on Mora's track record, seems to be a winner as well. So I'm interested to see, what this can be in year one. I do think that you have to make a bowl. I know some people disagree with me in the local media sphere. They feel like, 5 wins would be more than enough. And I understand the sentiment. It would be plus 3 wins, which is nothing to scoff at. But man, when you see what some of these other programs with far less to offer, with far worse budgets, with worse facilities have been able to do in such a tight time frame, I think you've got to aim higher. And that's certainly been the tone that's been conveyed from Mora when it comes to him not allowing year one to be a fallback or something you can just use as, it's year one. What are you going to do? All the years count the same. The pressure to win is certainly greater than it's ever been, given the way that the landscape of college football is changing. And that's unfortunate in some senses because, the reality is CSU has failed to meet its potential for a long time now. So it's probably statistically unlikely that all of a sudden they are going to just start, doing everything the right way. But also as a fan, you've got to hold out hope despite it being kind of a bleak scenario and despite having largely missed the boat over the last 10 years and then seeing so many of your peers pass you by, schools like Utah, BYU, etc. But if anybody's going to be able to flip this thing and get it rolling quickly, I do think it's Jim Mora. The guy won at UConn where it was unprecedented. He won right away at UCLA, which really has not done a whole lot since he left. Chip Kelly had a couple of nice seasons here or there. He won year one with the Atlanta Falcons. He's a guy who has been able to play into the strengths of his team. It hasn't always looked the same, in terms of like what their strengths as a team are. They've leaned into, the types of guys they have. And I think you'll see that with CSU this year. I'm not sure about the receiving core. They feel like they're maybe lacking there. Certainly a far cry from, when you had Michael Gallup, BC Johnson, and Richard all in the same receiving room, multiple NFL guys, and you bring in Preston and Hansley and so many of those other guys who are a part of that convo. I think they have some guys who can make some plays, but I think the strength of the offense especially is going to be that tight end room, regardless of whether Sperlin factors into the equation or not. I still think that's going to be the deepest position group on the offense. I love the running back room, especially if Robinson can be healthy on top of what we've already seen from Mel Brown, who's dynamic, man. He's quick. He's got great vision. Use him in the pass game. Despite not being the biggest back in the world, he's effective between the tackles. Like, they have some really intriguing guys. They have definitely upgraded the talent level of the team. But how quickly can it come together? We'll see. I want to play this entire sequence, including me kind of whiffing on the initial question. But I'm doing that because, Mora could have been, a grump about it or annoyed or, just move on. I don't think the question landed, but he made a genuine effort, one, to answer it. And then, when we did, get on the same page, I thought he gave a really great response. And again, it's early. you lose the first, you go 1-3 out of the gate. I imagine, based on the things I'll be saying about the team, they probably won't like me in the same way. You saw some of that evolve, throughout the Norvell era. I was very popular, with that coaching staff early on in the tenure. By November of last year, a lot less so. Although I think a lot of those guys knew I was just doing my job. But that's how it goes, right? But early on, Mora's been really good to work with from the media perspective, and I hope that continues to be the case. But here's him talking about the importance of the roster being connected, and while you can appreciate and know somebody's athletic strengths, like, hey, he's really quick or shifty. If I get him the ball in the open field, good things are going to happen here. Football is the ultimate team sport. Like, as much as we fixate on individual matchups, on schemes, on all that stuff, there's also an element of just willpower and wanting to run through your opponent's face because of, the passion you have for the guys next to you. They certainly had that in the locker room during the McElwain years. I think that's been missing at times over the last decade, and that's an area that I hope to see improve. Jim Mora certainly thinks that it's important. Here's him talking about exactly that.
A lot of places, you've had success at a lot of places early in the process. What's kind of a misconception, do you feel like, with fans or media talking heads when it comes to this process of building a team?
I don't know, because I don't really pay attention to talking heads. So give me a misconception, and I'll tell you what do you think, and then I can answer it. You know what I mean? Like, what is? I don't know what's out there. I don't read anything.
What do you feel is most significant, I guess, about the team building process, especially in year one, that maybe wouldn't be obvious to someone like me?
Okay, the way they connect, on the field and off the field. Just having that connection to each other, understanding each other's why, what motivates them, what their backgrounds are, what their history is, what some of the obstacles they had to overcome in their life. The closer they are as teammates, the better we'll be as a team, and that doesn't necessarily always show up out here because it's so competitive. But watching them off the field, watching them in the meal room, even watching them in the weight room, the way they encourage each other, really get to know each other, because that builds the trust that you have to have when you go into the season, and particularly in a game. You got to have great trust about the guy next to you on either side, in front of you and behind you. So I think that's probably something that is overlooked at times.
How do you build?
Off of that, one of the things that you're trying to cultivate with a winning culture is internal competition, and that can be a tough balance, especially when you're trying to practice with the physicality necessary to be, a quality football team. That's a really, really tight rope to try and walk when it comes to, we want to practice hard. We want guys truly giving it their all. But we also don't want it to be personal, right? We want guys competing because they know they're competing against each other, but that's also competing for each other and with each other, because we're bringing the best out of each other. We're going hard, when that whistle blows throughout the rep, but then, we're helping each other up, not fighting, that type of stuff. And that comes down to a concept of what Mora refers to as competitive maturity. And here's him kind of giving some insight into that.
Competitive maturity, and we address it almost every day. We're competing against each other, but we're competing for each other. It combines with what we're talking about about the team stuff. We show them examples of people that they respect in athletics or in the arts, whatever, demonstrating that. We talked about Drew Brees last night, and he's a great example of competitive maturity, and he talked about that, about being a good teammate and competing like crazy on the field, but not letting it get personal. We showed a great clip the other night of John Lynch talking about Joey Bosa and what's their really good offensive lineman, 77? Trent. And John Lynch, who's a Hall of Famer, is talking about he loves to go out to practice and watch those guys because they fight like crazy from snap to whistle. And then when the whistle blows, they help each other. Hey, I saw this, you need to do this. I'm trying to do this. And so they're competing like crazy, and they're raising their level of play, but at the same time they're helping each other out. So it's about talking about it and giving them great examples, certainly with guys that they respect.
The last thing that we kind of learned from Mora is a little bit of what he believes about leadership. And I believe throughout the Bobo and Adazio and Norvell eras, Bobo might have been week to week a couple of the years. But at least for the last 5 years, CSU football has voted on captains for the season. They would vote in the preseason. Those would be the guys. And the funny thing is, especially when things go bad, you could look up by, late October, November, and it's like, man, half of the supposed captains have quit the team. And that's not going to be the situation every year, right? Like you very well could, go into a season and pick the right guys and then have them, meet the standard all season long. But Mora believes it's more of an earned thing week to week. So they'll have different captains every week. I like that though, right? Because it gives you the desire to, push for it if you are not initially chosen and you would hope to be. If you are chosen, you want to continue to do the right things and feel the glory of, being respected that much by your teammates and getting to represent the squad as a captain. Like, I just really feel like they've done a good job of emphasizing internal competition and really, also trying to bring them together as a team and looking at it not as, the responsibility of 1 to 2 individuals. It's on the quarterback and Omar Diamande or whatever name you want to throw out there to, be the standard bearers for the entire team. He looks at it more as like a standard you would hope the entire team is able to meet. And I like that because I do think there's been a little bit of too much of leaning into like this guy is our leader on one side of the ball and this guy's the leader on the other side of the ball. You need leadership, but you need it throughout your locker room, especially in the ultimate team sport. And I'm kind of curious to see how that'll play out this year, especially with so much roster turnover, right? Like you don't really have a guy that you could just point to as that's the leader of the team. Like I do think Diamande is going to be one of those guys for the defense, and I'd be surprised if he wasn't often voted a captain. Your starting quarterback hopefully is respected and liked enough by his peers to be selected as a captain, not just when you have to change it up because you've had so many injuries that you just have to put a body out there, but because they, actually view him as that guy from the beginning. Some veiled messaging there if maybe you didn't quite catch it. Leadership is something that needs to be more of like an action and like a way that you carry yourself than just following orders or like having one individual, be the guy up there saying Simon says and having everybody follow along. Here is Jim Mora, kind of talking about leadership and not really knowing, who those guys are yet. And really it being a status that is going to be earned over the following weeks and months.
I don't know yet. It's still something to be seen. I am one of those guys that kind of rejects that concept of you have 1 or 2 or 3 leaders. Everyone on this field, everyone on this team can have a leadership role in their own way. The last thing you want is someone to think they're a leader but not demonstrate the traits that a leader should demonstrate. And so we let it develop naturally. You see where guys gravitate, who they go to, who steps up. The number one thing you have to do if you're going to be a leader is demonstrate the standard at all times. You can never slip. And if you don't do that, then you're really not a leader. You're just a freaking yakety yak.
What's your approach to captains? Do you name them like week to week? Do you
Week
have
to
season
week.
captains?
Nah, week to week. You got to earn it. Like I said, we'll vote on captains after the season's over.
All right. Before we get out of here, I did want to shout out CSU Football, who has been awesome this year with providing media assets. The clips that we use there were courtesy of CSU Athletics instead of the less high quality ones that I'm able to get on my phone and put out on social real quick while I'm out there. They've provided great photos. They also have some B-roll, which, typically gets used on news broadcasts. But I thought to myself, I've got a video platform. We can show a little bit of highlights. If they're going to send it out, let's go ahead and use it. So these are courtesy of CSU Athletics. It's just some highlights from day 5, their first day in pads. I'll kind of give some commentary over it, and then we'll talk about, some names to keep an eye on over the next couple of weeks. We'll wrap up with some final thoughts. If you've got any questions, comments, etc., fire them in the Toyota chat. Already see a few. 5 wins is an embarrassing standard. IRF_12 says Bobo was fired for getting 7 each year. Low standards produce bad results. There's more context that factors into all of that, but the sentiment I can agree with, and I have talked about that. Let's not pre-write excuses, and let's stop being so accepting of basically potential being some measure of success, right? That great quote we talked about with the South Florida article a couple of weeks ago. It's great that CSU has all this potential. It's great that we have facilities and we've invested and we've had great athletes. And on paper, everything is there to succeed, from a fantastic school academically to one of the best campuses in the country, a really fun and poppin' college town that's fun to live in as a student, but also, as you grow, is a great spot to live and raise your family. It's all there. But at some point, like it's all hypothetical until you actually go out and achieve it. And I'm so tired of seeing schools with far less to offer, frankly, run laps around CSU. We should not be accepting of that. And I am going to really try and lean into the idea of we are pushing for higher standards this year, even though there are going to be some really tough circumstances that work against a first-year program with a challenging schedule and 70 new players and, new staffs on both sides of the ball. It's a lot of change. It's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of bad history that you're trying to overcome. But again, if schools like UNLV can turn it around, if New Mexico can win 9 games in year 1 with the first-year staff, in a schedule in which you have 7 home games, I just don't see how you can look at 5 wins as being enough, especially with what's at stake, with the way that college football is changing, with what you're spending and betting on yourself with this jump to the Pac-12. It's put up or shut up time for CSU because it's just never been more important. Aaron responded to that. Bobo was fired for winning 7 games total in his last 2 years. That's different than 7 wins a season. Also true. It fell off of a cliff in a hurry. I think Colin Hill's health, unfortunately, was a big part of that. I do think that 2018 goes completely differently if you have a healthy Colin Hill for the entirety of the season. But at the same time, like, the fact that they struggled so much to win the big games, even in those 7-win seasons. Yeah, you won 7 games, but other than your first year, you never beat Wyoming or Air Force again. You were 0-for against the Buffs, and you went 0-for-3 in your bowl appearances. It feels a little bit hollow when you both start and end the season with a gut punch or, a sack tap. And man, CSU has done that pretty frequently. Like, even, 24 is a great example, right? You win 8 games. You beat Wyoming and Air Force in the same season for the first time in close to a decade. But you start with just getting your teeth kicked in by Texas, completely underperform in the showdown at home, and then, blow your chance to play your way into the conference title game despite not having to play the top 2 teams in the league. And when you get to the Arizona Bowl with great turnout, the fans are there. It could have been a moment. Instead, it ends up being just big old glass of water on our faces, and yet another moment of disappointment and misery. Maybe this year will be different, though. I really went on a tangent there, but I appreciate you guys in the Toyota chat. Let's play these clips from CSU football. If you're listening on the audio side, you can't see it, obviously, but all these clips have been posted on social by CSU football. These are courtesy of CSU Athletics. So again, I am really thankful for, because this is good for the fans. So let's play that clip. All right, it's a little bit laggy, so we'll see. We might have to pull the plug on it. But we got, a screen pass there to Lundberg Coleman. That's Terrence Smith, actually. But there's the deep shot in there from Farrar at one point. You get Haas Haney hitting a bomb to Levon Brown. It's cool to be able to have a little bit of clips here. You see the way that Farrar is able to push the ball downfield. Like, there really is a lot to like about his game. One of the things that certainly stood out to me, and you could see it there, is the increased size in the trenches on both sides of the ball. This is the biggest CSU's been defensively in quite some time. You see some of the explosiveness on offense with the way Haas is able to move, with the way Mel Brown comes out of the backfield. I really do think there's a world in which this team is quite competitive year one. Are they a championship contender? We'll see. I think you'll find out a lot about this group over the first 5 weeks of the season. You go 4-1, find a way to upset a top 15 BYU team, 4-0, 5-0, all of a sudden that changes everything. But I think you at minimum have got to go 3-2 over those first 5. And you're really going to be dependent on a lot of these guys we're seeing, Juice Farine, whatever quarterback it ends up being defensively, Diamande, Brandon Kelly, some of those UConn transfers who we know they're going to lean on. You need those guys to produce in a major way. But I'm cautiously optimistic about what I've seen from this team athletically. I think a lot of the transfers they brought in are going to hit. I think there's potential with this group, and I'm so desperate to have a season that is not irrelevant before we've even gotten to Halloween, to where everybody's given up hope. At the end of September, there was a clip there of Farrar, making a couple guys miss in the open field, taking off. Again, he's bigger, he pushes it down the field, but he's an underrated athlete. Like, that's not an element of his game that's just not there. He's not a statue or anything like that. And I really do feel like both QBs are still in it at this point. Just a couple of names to keep an eye on before we get out of here. Troy Foster continues to look the part. He had an awesome spring, had a great touchdown catch from Haney that CSU shared out. That was encouraging to see. He, I believe, will be on the field early, and I think he's one of the better athletes in the room. So, find a way to get the ball in his hands. If he's getting open, if he's making plays, if he's dependable, I don't care if he's a first-year guy, get him out on the field. Grant Hauser, another guy who I think is going to be quietly one of their more important pieces this year. We've talked so much about Juice Farine. He's going to command so much attention from the defense. I think that's going to open up some opportunities for, Nate Archurchie, who I view as a little bit more of a blocking tight end. Dominic Toy, certainly, who's another UConn transfer who had a great spring. But Hauser was a former 4-star prospect, started at Louisville, started his career at Louisville, I should say, now at CSU. He makes some plays. When his number gets called, he seems to step up. He's somebody that I think can be, sneaky important this year, especially just given the strength of this team. And I think you're going to see some 12 personnel, maybe even some 13 personnel. Why not get weird if you're CSU? If you've got all these great backs, if you've got all these great tight ends, maybe you're a little bit lacking at receiver. The weirder you get, the more flexibility you're going to have just in terms of, play action sets and all kinds of, motion and misdirection. Like, I think there's a world in which Price Tracy really gets in his bag this year and leans on some quirkiness, which I think would be a lot of fun. Another guy to keep an eye on, Brandon Kelly. He had an awesome spring, physically looks the part. I'm really intrigued by those jacks and linebackers. Again, I just keep looking at the size of that front seven, and it is noticeable compared to what we have seen in recent years. Transfers that pass the eye test. Tarian Johnson, the offensive tackle, big, strong dude, moves well. Diamande is a freak. I know he was like third team, I think, on Phil Steele's all conference picks for the preseason. I'll be shocked if that guy's not a first team all conference selection. You're going to, the board is deeper than it was last year, and Diamande is about as good of a replacement in that scenario as you could hope for. That dude he's the truth. He's an NFL backer. Mel Brown, though, I tweeted about him yesterday. He's going to be a problem for defenses. Just his shiftiness, his vision, his explosiveness in the open field. He's a home run hitter, and he reminds me so much of Dalen Dawkins. I think he's a guy that's going to be really important for CSU season, and I would be surprised if he's not the lead back in that rotation. Although I think there's a lot to like about the group. Lundberg Coleman had a really solid spring. We think Darrell Robinson, if he can stay healthy, has a chance to be a game changer. He certainly was 2 years ago at UConn. But Damian Moore, the freshman they signed out of Florida, who was originally committed to UConn, he had a good spring, and we've seen him, get some run occasionally. Like, he's a guy who I think you could play early on and maybe offers a little bit of that power element that you don't have quite as much with some of those other backs. I'm stoked football is back. I'm stoked to have things to talk about. I'm stoked to have all of you guys rocking with us. We are in overtime, so the conversation continues at thednvr.com. We got some stuff in the Toyota chat that I wanted to address before we get out, because I appreciate having such an engaged audience with me, back on day one post-vacation. Aaron says Bobo's health was part of that, going back to what we were talking about a couple minutes back, having the head coach miss most of fall camp with a medical issue isn't optimal, no doubt. And that whole situation was really scary, man. He looked bad at one point, like pale and struggled to move. And I'm really happy that all of that is seemingly resolved. He got to go home. He was a good dude and had some bad things work against him. One of which was they played no defense throughout the entirety of his era. But I really just feel like it comes down to Colin Hill's health at the end of the day. And probably some questionable decision making and some of those tight losses, as all coaches are going to have. Taylor says CSU media team doing a nice job with content so far. I agree. There's a lot being asked of those people behind the scenes over at CSU, and they're producing more content than ever. They're meeting the moment, and that includes what they're providing to us on the outside media, not just internal, which I really do appreciate. IRF_12. If you were going to rank overall athleticism of this team compared to last year's prior, where does this team rank? Oh, they're a lot more athletic across the board. I mean, like substantially, I guess. I'm not exactly sure what you're asking me in terms of, like, do you want me to like go position group by position group, or just like if last year was a 3.5, what would this year be? And I'm not saying last year was, but I would say if you were going 1 to 10 last year, you were probably on average sub 5, and this group would be a couple pegs above that. I'm not going to say they're like a 9 or like some SEC team, but they've got some NFL bodies on both sides of the ball. They've got legit size in the trenches, as we've got somebody asking about the offensive line. We'll see how all that pans out. They're still trying to figure out who exactly is going to be, in that rotation. You're going to need more than 5 guys over the course of the year. They've moved a lot of people around going back to spring. I think there's a lot of versatility within that room, but you want to make sure you've got guys that kind of master their role, right? And you're not just a jack of all trades, master of none. You do need a couple of guys who are going to be locked in and set and forget. But I really do feel like, at least in terms of the athleticism, the size, both sides of the ball in the trenches, they are looking good compared to what we've seen these past couple of years, where I feel like they were underwhelming in that regard. And when you're also, lacking explosiveness out wide and you're not maximizing your quarterback, that's a lot of factors working against you. Finally here, Kyle says, I'm getting so hyped for the season. I need to temper my expectations, but refuse to be a Debbie Downer. Hey man, why lean into the misery until you have to? Logically, what CSU's history is. We've been there. We've done that. I've made the Charlie Brown metaphor so many times. Why do we keep trying to kick the football? Lucy's just going to keep pulling it away. But what if we kick it? What if we kick it one of these times? That's what you have to keep telling yourself, I guess. If you don't have hope, what's the point of being a sports fan, right? If you can't enjoy any of this, if you can't be excited about, bringing in a coach with a big name who's won at other places at an unprecedented rate, and he's, been able to improve the talent level that you have in the building. I think that this team, it's a lot of moving pieces, and there are a lot of factors that could work against you, especially if injuries start to add up like they did last year. But I have them winning 7 games, and I think there's a world in which you can get to that like 8-9 range if you beat UTSA and some of those coin flip games, Texas State, maybe pull an upset or two. Aaron says, I can feel that Justin's running out of gas. The post vacation lull has hit him. It's true. Got to get those reps in. It's training camp for me as well. I would say to anybody though who thinks this is easy, try and speak for 60 minutes straight without break, including, throw a couple ads in there and see how your voice is feeling after about 65 minutes or so. Shout out to all the homies in the Toyota chat. Shout out to our awesome producer, Christian. Shout out to all the CSU fans. We are always proud to be around here. Much love, y'all. Peace.
We all silly like the mayor.